local investor here in Matt Carroll. He's also a partner in the new Keller Williams Palmetto office. So he's a broker, which means he's super smart, right? Agent, the smartest ones around. This guy's, he's been great. He's done a lot of rental property investing. He has got tons right now, even a little bit of Airbnb, which he's probably not going to talk about because it's a little bit of an anomaly, but I'm sure he can talk to you about it later, unless he doesn't get into it today. But what we're going to talk about is rental properties. So if you're interested, or you think you might be in the future, now's the time to turn your ears on, take some notes. I'm going to let Matt introduce his background for himself because there's just too much for me to go through. So it's up to you, man.
All right, thanks. So I have a few questions I always ask when I start these before I get into who I am and where I came from and stuff like that, but and I'll explain why I'm asking these questions later because they might sound funny when I first ask them. But how many of you know me or have heard of me? So like 3 or 4, cool. Awesome. Doesn't really matter, but I'm going to explain why I asked that in a little bit. So a little bit about me and myself. I bought my first house, well, let me go back a little farther than that. When I was a junior in college, I rented a house from a guy who was 23 years old, and I was just kind of enamored that this 23-year-old guy was my landlord, and I was like 21 or 20 at the time. And he kind of took me under his wing a little bit. I actually ran track when I was in college, had knee surgery, so all my friends who were on the track team were off the track meets, and I was sitting there trying to get my knee better, so I didn't have any friends to go party with or anything. So I did a little work on the house. He hired me to come start working with him on his houses. So worked with him for the last 2 years of my college career, and then right before I graduated, my senior year, I bought my first house. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. Like 3 weeks later, I bought my first house. That was kind of my cannonball, like we were talking about earlier. I read a book and was like, well, I guess I just got to figure out how to do this. I'll go do it. So I did like 8 my first year. Had a job that I had already taken before I bought my first house. Worked that job for literally my last day was my 1-year anniversary from the time I started the job. I had some requirements that I asked them to meet, and they didn't meet them, and so I told them I'd work until my 1-year anniversary, and if they hadn't met them, then I was going to go do the real estate thing full time, and they didn't meet them, so I said, okay, bye, and had my 1-year anniversary and going away party at the same time that day. So I think I did 8 that first year, but immediately after that, I bought the Home Investors franchise, which is the billboards around town that you guys saw 10 years ago, 15 years ago that said, we buy ugly houses, had a big caveman on them. So that was me. There was actually 2 offices in town. But as part of that, I ramped up really quickly. So I was buying between 10 and 20 houses a month most months. So I bought and sold just over 1,000 houses, whether they're assignments or wholesales or full renos or whatever. I usually had 3 or 4, sometimes 5 crews going at one time. And that was all great until the market crashed. And then it was not so great. But the market crashed, and that taught me a lot of lessons. So I've got some acorns kind of tucked away for what may be coming in the future. But at one point, I had gotten up to 125 rental houses. I'm down to between 50 and 60 now, kind of the 50 and 60 that I want. I had to kind of acquire some by default as the market crashed, because I had a lot of houses that just became unsellable when loans went away for a while. So as part of that business, I had also started a real estate brokerage alongside that, and kind of ran them together. I had somebody actually running that brokerage for me. I didn't have my license yet at the time. I just started a brokerage because I was renovating so many houses. I just wanted to keep that money in-house instead of paying an agent to sell them for me. But over time, it just became more and more beneficial for me to go ahead and get my license. So after having owned a brokerage for a few years, I went ahead and got licensed. Market crashed, some things happened. I merged companies, sold out, merged again. And then just, that's kind of the details that you don't really need. But just about a year ago, we opened up, or 6 months ago, we opened up Keller Williams Palmetto downtown. And that's kind of my main gig now. I still have my rental houses, I still flip houses. I'm just doing it maybe 10 or 12 a year now instead of 10 or 12 a month. I don't really want to get back to having that overhead and that stuff that I had before. When I was single, I have a family now and stuff. I can't work 100 hours a week like I used to, or 200 or whatever it was. I don't think there's 200 hours in a week, but I feel like I was working every hour of those back in the day. So now I'm where I am, and I do a lot of these. I'm just kind of talking about my philosophy. I've kind of made this philosophy over time. I didn't really get it from a book. Didn't really get it from the mentor. It's just kind of trial and error and hard knocks, and this is kind of what I've come up with. So I'm happy to share that with you guys today. So how many of you guys in this room want to have rental houses? Okay, I'd say that's just about everybody. How many of you have rentals right now? Okay, so that's maybe half of those, that many people. So with rentals, how many of you, of that number, how many of you have a goal of where you want to get with your rentals? All right, sweet. And how many have a plan to get to that goal? Okay, so you can tell as I'm asking those questions, the numbers are getting less and less, right? So I found in most meetings like this, everybody wants to have rentals, right? If they don't have them now, they want to have them. A lot of people have, a goal of where they eventually want to be, but most of the time it's very rare that people actually have a plan of how to get to that point. It's, yeah, I want to have, a ton of rentals, I want to make a bunch of money, but there's not really an action plan to say, okay, here's how I'm going to go about doing that. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about a little bit today in kind of broad terms. But the first two questions I usually ask people that I would ask yourselves is, what's your goal for rentals? And that is, most of the time there's two reasons somebody gets into rental houses. The first one is, does anybody know what they are, or what I would say they are?
Passive income.
Passive income? Yep.
Tax write-off.
What'd you say, tax write-off? Some people tax write-off. If you're getting into it for tax write-off, you're probably in a pretty good position. Anybody else? Equity, yep. So those are two things, passive income and equity are two things I'll talk about. Usually it's, some people want to replace income. So it's, hey, I want to not do my 9 to 5. I want to be able to live on my income from my rental houses. Some people don't really want to replace it. They like their job, they're happy with what they're doing. They just want to get more and they want to set themselves up for the future, so they just want to supplement income. And so really I found those are usually the two reasons people that aren't actively investing right now or don't actively have rental houses right now, those are the two reasons people want to get rental houses. They either want to replace their income that they currently have, or they want to supplement their income. And so what I would ask you is, as part of that, what's it going to take to get to whichever point that is? Are you trying, if you want to replace your income, what's your income? And how many rental houses are it going to take to get to that point? So somebody just, and then I'm not going to ask what your income is, but somebody just throw out a number of what you feel like you would need to have to replace your income.
25 minutes.
What'd you say?
25 minutes.
Well, give me just a monthly number.
8,000.
So $8,000 a month. So if somebody's trying to replace $8,000 a month, how many rental houses do you think that is?
Back to back. Well, it depends on how much you charge.
Right. So, but that's what I'm saying. So that's where you want to get to is say, okay, so I need this much to replace my income, or I need this much. I feel like I need $2,000 of supplemental income or $3,000 of supplemental income. So then back into it from there and say, okay, so what's $8,000 worth a month of rentals? How many rentals do I need? Is it 10 rentals? Is it 20 rentals? Am I going to have mortgages on them? Am I not? So that's the part that I think a lot of people don't think about and don't analyze is, okay, so I feel like if I make $50 a month on rentals, that'll be good. If I feel like I can make 100, that's going to be great. If I feel like I can make 200, that's even better. If I can make 500, that's going to be even better. I would say get away from all of that and just figure out how much do I need to replace, how many of those, if I can make 5 on this one and 3 on that one and whatever. I'll show you a spreadsheet in a little bit that I've developed that I started a long time ago and just kind of worked my way into it. And it's a spreadsheet that shows me what my debt to income ratio is on each property, just a quick little simple spreadsheet. And that's what I've always used because I was told a long time ago by a banker that I work with that as long as I can keep my debt to income ratios, he'll loan me as much money as I want. And that was kind of, obviously music to my ears. Because right now, people who own rentals, where have you been finding your money at?
Small local banks.
Small local banks? Where else? What'd you say?
Credit unions.
Credit unions? Who else? Private money? Yeah. So and that's what I was finding a lot of back in the day, is that a lot of people were having to kind of hammer a square peg into a round hole to get a lender to give them money for a rental house. And the strings have tightened up even since then. So what I found, I'm still able to buy rental houses because my ratios are still where he told me a long time ago, keep your ratios right there and you're going to be good. So that's what I tried to do. I'll get into that in a little bit with you. So I have two different philosophies also on rentals, and I can talk to you about it a little bit. And this is again made up numbers that I make up. Didn't read in the book. They're not official names. But I think there's two types of rental property, and I have both of them in my portfolio. If you're just trying to supplement income and you already have an income, then I would say you do well buying what I call equity rentals, which is what you were talking. You said that I think earlier that you're trying to build equity. So I look at equity rentals in Columbia as rentals that are like maybe in Rosewood, Shandon, a little bit more high dollar areas than where you buy some other rentals, some more cash flow rentals. Areas like that you're going to see, I would say you're probably going to see more appreciation over time, but you might not see as much money every month, right? The price you have to pay for houses over there, most likely, you're not going to be able to cash flow much. Like when we were in here early listening to some of the price that people were talking about, you heard some parts of town that, oh, you can get that one and it rents for $950, but you're only paying $60 for it. Over here, you're paying $140, it's only renting for $1,300 a month. So the ratios are off depending on what part of town you go to, right? So Rosewood, Shandon, areas like that, you're buying what I call equity rentals. The other type of rental I talk about is cash flow rentals. Those rentals are things in, let's say, North Main, Two Notch, and areas like that you may be able to go pick up houses for really cheap. You might go buy a house for $25,000 and it might rent for $550 or $600. That house is probably going to be worth $25,000 from now until 2080. Because those houses are always going to be houses that investors are buying looking for cash flow. So, that house, it makes you great cash flow every month, but it's also going to be a house that you're going to have more maintenance and you're going to have more property management issues, and it's a lot more labor intensive to manage properties like that are a little bit lower on the rent spectrum. So what I say, when I started, this is how I made my money, this is how I ate. So I had to have cash flow rentals because I needed to put food on the table. But I also looked at the future and said, I can't just build a portfolio of cash flow rentals because then I'm going to have a bunch of, rentals that are hard to manage, people moving more often, and I'm not going to be building anything for the future. All I'm going to be doing is having these houses that I'm going to be able to sell for the exact same thing I bought them for, 10, 15, 20 years from now. So I look at it as you get two different types of rentals. To have a balanced portfolio of rentals, if you're going to be replacing income, you really got to have both, because it's really hard to find a house that does both for you. It's rare that you're going to find a cash flow rental that's also going to build equity. If you can find one, great. It used to be that areas like Olympia and some places like that were like that because they were still on the move up, and you could go in and find a good deal, and you could rent it for a lot. So those are appreciating and you're renting them for a lot. So if you look at my portfolio, I got lucky, and that was an area I concentrated on early, and I have a lot of rental houses in Olympia. So I would say that if for the person looking to start a rental portfolio right now, look and see if you can find other areas like that you may be able to find some cash flow and some equity building in the same house. And I don't know what areas of town those are right now, but I know they're out there because there's always that next area to look for. So Casey might be an area like that. Other areas that have not traditionally been quite as popular but are still in a good area and still might improve in equity. So having said that, what I would say, if you go back to your $8,000 a month number, you might have a house over here that's making you $300 a month as a cash flow rental, but let's say 400, so it's easy numbers. So to get to your $8,000 a month, you have to have 20 of those, right? But I would say don't just go buy 20 of those to get to your $8,000, because then you're going to have 20 headaches and 20 things that aren't doing anything for you for the future. So I would really say go buy 20 of those and go buy 10, buy one and one if you can, and get to the point that you have your cash flow built up, but that you also have some equity building for the future. And that's kind of, I think, the thing that a lot of investors miss is a lot of investors just look at, let me go buy a house and we'll see how it rents, or we'll go through this situation, or I'm going to move out of the house that I was living in, go buy another house, I'll just rent the one that I was living in. But to me, as both a realtor and an investor, I will always caution people against that, because I always say if you're going to buy a rental house, go into a rental house with the intention of making it a rental house. Don't go into a rental house thinking, or don't go buy a house thinking that I'm going to flip it, renovate it, and then, oh, I can't flip it, I'll just make it a rental. Don't do that. Go ahead and take your lumps, sell it for a loss if you have to, and then go find a rental house and have it be an intentional, planned out thing that you're building your portfolio. That is something I can tell you from experience. That was what I did a lot when the market was crashing. It was like, well, I got these houses I can't sell, I'll just make them rentals. That was the worst thing I could have done. I would have been better served by just selling those off, taking my little bit of a loss right then, instead of just having them just keep bleeding over time and having them just be not really a rental house. I over renovated them for what a rental needed to be, so I had too much in them, I wasn't cash flowing, and it was just a constant battle trying to get those payments paid and everything else. So be intentional about your plan is what my biggest thing I would say to you today is be intentional about your plan if you're going to build a rental portfolio. Figure out what the numbers are, back into those numbers, and then stick with it. And anything in business in general, I would tell you, be sure that you're checking your business. Run a business. Don't just buy houses, run a business. So any business, you want to look at your numbers, you want to know what your numbers are, you want to have some system of collecting your rent and knowing what your expenses are on that property. The worst thing you can do is just go rent a house, not know how much money's coming in, plumbing breaks, you pay a plumber to go fix it, electrician needs a thing, you pay the electrician, needs a little roof patch, you pay the roofer, and you don't know how much money's coming and going. You have to know your business. And if you're looking at it on a yearly basis, then you can have a really bad year, right? Because you're only looking at it once a year. If you look at it every 6 months, then you might have a bad 6 months, but at least you can take action and fix it so the next 6 months aren't that bad and your whole year isn't bad. If you're looking at it every 3 months, then maybe you have bad 3 months, but at least you can fix it going forward. So the more often you're looking at it, the more you know, crap, I'm going the wrong way. Let me fix this, let me do what I need to do, go chase this rent or do whatever I need to do to go get my business back right again and make sure I'm not having a bad 6 months or bad year. That's probably the biggest thing I can tell you today. Because I did a lot of that. I did a lot of, let me just go buy this one, put a renter in it, go buy that one, put a renter in it, go buy that one, put a renter in it. And I wasn't really paying attention to what was going on behind me. It was just buy the next one, make the deal, make the deal, make the deal. And that's all great when the money's flowing and I'm flipping houses and making money from that and different things are happening. But it takes a market correction to go back and look and say, oh man, these things aren't really making me the money I thought they were making me because I haven't been paying attention to them. So just make sure that as you start, you're intentional about how you go, and then you're monitoring each one as you go, so that it's building like you want it to build, and you're not just doing it. It's kind of funny. We didn't talk about our, coasting through life or any of that earlier. But as he was talking about it, I was like, hey, Andrew, you're nailing it. Like that's leading right into what I was about to talk about. Because I did a lot of that. I did a lot of coasting through my rental houses. It was just, like I said. So don't coast either way. So I'm going to show you real quick. Move this out of the way. A spreadsheet. Oh, that's my daughter. So I'm going to show you the spreadsheet that I did. And if you guys have questions about it, feel free to ask. But this is just a way that I kind of manage and monitor or figure out how to buy a house right. And there's a couple of different things that I use on here. So let's see. So usually when you look at a house, you know about what it's going to rent for, right? Like most of the houses that we talked about early on, people were saying, oh, it's going to rent for this, it's going to rent for that, right? So throw out an example to me of one of those houses we talked about earlier. What's a monthly rent amount? $1,300. So $1,300. What I generally plan on is, so everybody knows allowances are things that allow you to factor in risk. So there's a 10% vacancy allowance that I allow, and there's a 10% maintenance allowance that I allow. Depending on, I happen to be a little bit lucky and I handle my management fees differently. I manage my own properties. I have employees that are helping me with multiple things, so I don't factor in a management fee because luckily my other businesses pay my employees that help me with my management. But if you do have a management fee, let's say management is 10%, and And hopefully you guys are fixing your houses and making them nice before you rent them, so we'll say 5% on maintenance. Usually a 25% allowance is a pretty decent number to think about. So on a house that rents for $1,300, what do you think, what are annual taxes on something like that? What'd you say?
Probably about
2,100, the 6% rate. And then annual property insurance is $900.
Yeah.
So we'll call it $900. There's no monthly regime fee. We'll say it's a house. And so the debt service ratio is 1.25. That's what I always target. And so you'll see my spreadsheet comes down and calculates for me. If I have that house that's going to rent for $1,300 a month, that's going to have those allowances with that annual tax, with $900 property insurance, then my monthly principal and interest payment allowed is $580. So I go over here to my other tab, and that's going to tell me $580 at, what can we get money at right now, 6%? So 6%, and my loans that I do now, because I have a good bit of property, is I have to do 15-year loans on all mine with a local bank. You may be able to get 30-year money right now. If you can, that's great. I would recommend, as soon as you can, moving into a relationship with a local banker. I heard some people talk about local banks. To me, that's the best way to buy rental houses and accumulate rental houses, because after you build a little bit of a relationship with them, the money just flows. I tell people a lot that so when I was 22 years old, right after I bought my first house, and I bought into the Home Investors franchise, or right before I bought into the Home Investors franchise, I went into a local bank and asked them for $1 million credit line, and they basically just like laughed me out of the bank and were like, just graduated from college, $1 million credit line, bah! And then, I don't know, 6 weeks later, after I bought the franchise, and I was able to go in and say, hey, here's the results in Dallas, here's what they're doing in Atlanta, here's what they're doing in Charlotte, I'm just running this system, I do the same thing, how about $1 million credit line? And they were like, all right, we'll do it. So I got a $1 million credit line, and that was after a lot, it wasn't that simple. It was with a lot of meetings, a lot of doing things, a lot of pro formas, a lot of business plans. It was a chore to get that relationship set up where I could have that credit line. One of the aha moments, or whatever you want to call it, of my life came when that same banker, probably 3 years later, I had started working with another guy a little bit, so he wasn't getting quite as much of my business, the first guy. So the first guy called up and asked me, how much money he could give me, basically. He was like, hey, I haven't been loaning you very much money lately. Can I loan you some money? Like, well, how do I loan you money? I'm like, man, it went from me like begging him to loan me money, and now he's calling me, asking me to give me money. How awesome is that? So that was one of my awesome moments. So luckily I've gotten to that point where I've got that 15-year relationship. The unfortunate part about that is that my loans are 15 years, but that also, from a risk perspective, it keeps me in check and makes sure that I'm paying that down quicker, and I'm not just barely paying any interest to it and not getting anywhere. So if you can make something cash flow at 15-year term with the 1.25 debt service, then you're pretty covered on risk, really covered on risk. And so what this tells me, and this is, like I said, it's very conservative, but what this tells me is that if I'm going to buy that house, I don't want to pay more than $68,732.45. Because that's what I can pay to get that payment, to get my debt service ratio where I want it. You'll see if I change that to a 30-year loan, that changes that number a lot. So on a 30-year loan, I could pay $96,739.30. Hopefully you guys can see that. I don't know if that red background is making it so you can't see it. So those two spreadsheets kind of work hand in hand. And I would recommend, you don't have to use this. There's probably a lot more complicated and complex spreadsheets out there. This is just what's worked for me in my career of buying houses. Another spreadsheet that I use is to figure out my rent, what rent I would have to rent something for to make it work, and to figure out what my ratio would be. So if I know that I can't, the property that I'm looking to buy, they're not going to go any lower than 90. So the least I can pay for is going to be $90,000. Then I've got to figure out whether I can talk myself into buying it or not. So let's say 6% interest on 15-year loan, that gives me a $759.47 a month payment. So if I want to calculate what rent that's going to work out at, I come over here with my 25% allowances. We'll say $2,100 and $900 again. So what that tells me is that I need about $1,000 a month to cover my expenses. But really, to get my debt service ratio and all my allowances, I really would need to rent it for about $1,600. And if I did that, my risk-adjusted cash flow, so the cash flow I plan on when I'm saying that, you know, I want to replace my income or whatever we're talking about, I would plan on having $252 out of that. So anytime I'm planning on income, I plan on risk-adjusted cash flow, because that's why you factor risk in, right? So if I bought this house and was able to get it for $90,000 and I was able to rent it for $1,682, then I would be $252 closer to my $8,000 a month if I was able to make those numbers work. And I just use that if I'm looking at a house. I know there's a set number. I look at what I have to rent it for, and I go, can I rent it for that much? How much do I have to put into it to rent it for that much? I'm not really sure. And then I back into the number. So there's another spreadsheet here using that same independent payment calculator that I had before. So if I'm $90,000 loan, 6% rate, 15-year term, that's my loan payment. If I want to, and I know that what I'm going to be able to rent it for. So let's say I'm going to be able to rent it for $1,500. Got my 25% allowances again. What do you say, 2,100, 900? So that tells me that if I was going to buy this house for $90,000, and that's the lowest I can go, like I said, and I knew that I'm not going to be able to rent it for this $1,682, but I think I could rent it for $1,500, then how risk averse am I at that point? And that's where that 1.15 debt service ratio comes in. And so I can look at it. What 1.15 means essentially is that I'm making 15% more than, or I'm making 15% essentially, risk adjusted, which is pretty good. But I know that my banker wants me to be at 1.25 on my whole portfolio. So when I'm factoring in buying houses, sometimes I can see two houses and plug the numbers in together and say, well, I can get to 1.35 here, only 1.15 here, but together they make my ratios be right. I can get money for both at the same time, so I'll just do that. So these spreadsheets just help me get there. And like I said, I'm happy to share these with you guys if you want to use it. I'm not going to guarantee the accuracy. You can make a mistake and buy something wrong. But they've just helped me, get going and know that I'm doing the right thing, rather than just saying, well, how much are you going to rent? Okay, I can make $100. Because making $100 a month on a house that you paid $400 for is probably pretty good. Making $100 a month on a house that you paid $250 for, probably not so good. And that's where those ratios come in and the risk adjustment comes in. So.
Assuming 100%.
That's assuming that so there's some more things behind the scene that go on with that. But you'll see, where's that? Yeah, so on this one, you'll see I have repairs in there. So obviously if the house needs $20,000 in repairs, instead of paying 96 for it, I pay 76 for it. You just subtract those repairs off, and that's if you're not trying to build any equity for doing those 20,000 repairs. So the way that I always use this was I very rarely go buy a house and just rent it because of what I've done for so long. Usually if I'm going to buy a house, I buy it for hopefully really cheap, put some money into it, and then put a loan on it after that. So I'll take the money back out at the end of the day. And so having these ratios tells me how much I can have in that house and be able to go to the bank and have them get all my money back. So instead of having to put 20% down or go buy one just that's already rented and put 20% down on it, I would rather go buy something, build up at least that 20% equity or however much equity I need to build up so I can be at this 1.25 debt to income ratio. And then I know when I go to my banker, I know how much money is going to give me back. So I can just show them these ratios and say, hey, here's where I'm at, here's what it is, here's property taxes, here's my allowances, so this is what the loan amount needs to be. He's like, yep, sounds good, we do it. And I just know that as long as I have, less than that in it, hopefully, then I'm getting at least that much money back out of it. And then I got to do a whole different calculator on you know, what my rate of return is on my cash and all that stuff. So that's always been my goal, and luckily I've been able to meet those goals for the most part, and keep my whole portfolio right around that 1.25 to 1.30 ratio. So what I would tell you guys is, and this is something that when I first got into the business, I was young, and you know, we're all young once. Like I was young and cocky and wanted to buy a bunch of houses and wanted to have a bunch of billboards, and I wanted to be the man. So I wanted everybody to know me. And as I've gotten older and met more people and know more people that buy houses and sell houses and everything else, I realized I don't really care if anybody knows me. Like I just want to do my thing, and I'll be perfectly happy to be that guy that has a bunch of rental houses and has other business going on and is making the money I need to make for my family, for the life I want to live. And I'd be cool if nobody knew me. You know, my life is a lot easier and a lot less stressful when I don't have 70 billboards out there. So that's the reason why I asked earlier if anybody knew me. And I think there was like 4 people in here that knew me. So that's perfect with me. And that's what I would tell you guys is focus on the business, focus on running the business, making sure your numbers are right. Don't worry about, you know, being this huge investor that everybody knows in town. There are those guys, and I'm sure they're doing great. But I've found in my experience that usually the guys that everybody knows are the guys that really aren't probably making much money for whatever reason, because they spend so much money getting people to know them. The guys that I've known that have done the best with rental properties and commercial properties and things like that are usually guys that just kind of sit back behind the scenes, do their thing, and make the life they want to have. So that's what I'll tell you guys. That's kind of what I got for you. So what questions do you guys have about any of that stuff that I went through?
When you stated that you would just basically use your money and then basically refinance out, how quickly is your lender, since you built a long relationship, how quickly is your lender making you season that property?
So let me talk about that for a little bit. So one thing that I think you'll find is when you start working with and this is the reason why, is when you start working with a local bank and build that relationship, everything gets easier. You know, there's hard money lenders, there's, you know, other private money, there's all these other things you can do. There's conventional loans. You can go to Bank of America or Wells Fargo or any of those places to get a conventional loan, and it's always jumping through a bunch of hoops. It's always like, oh, it's got to be seasoned, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. No, we can't do that. We can't check our boxes. Don't worry about that stuff. Go find somebody that's local, that's a commercial banker, and just build a relationship, because those guys aren't subject to all the RESPA rules that a regular traditional residential real estate broker or real estate mortgage lender is beholden to. They kind of make their own rules. They're a commercial banker. So they lend to you from a commercial side of things. And most of the time they're lending based on a relationship. They're not really lending based on the deal. They're lending based on you. So as long as they feel like you are going to make payments and you have a history of making payments, then they can kind of sweep by with a lot less oversight. It's tightened up a lot, but back in the day when I had kind of access to a lot more credit line and things, really all I did was I did an analysis on the houses. I said, you know, here's how much it's going to be worth afterwards, just kind of what you guys were doing earlier. Like, here's the ARV, here's how much it's going to take to fix it, here's what I can buy it for, give me some money. He was like, okay, no appraisal, no seasoning, no nothing. When I got done, it was like, hey, here's the lease, it's rented, so here's taxes, here's, you know, all that stuff. So the way I had it set up was everything that I would buy using my credit line. So I'd buy it with the credit line, get it fixed up, and then when I was ready to rent it, I would rent it, and then once I was able to go to the banker and get that moved off, I would get it moved off the credit line. So I would buy them all quick and easy. I mean, it was a 7 to 10 day closing, and that's really what it is. I'm saying was because things pre-market crash were a little bit easier than after-market crash, but it's still, you know, 12 to 14 days probably closing those. Luckily, I don't need him as much as I needed him, so I'm able to just buy things without him right now. So that part's easier, but I still have my rental loans with him. But credit line, you buy with credit line, move it over onto that permanent loan, and then go fill your credit line back up, move it over onto your permanent loan. And that's what he was saying, was as long as I can meet those ratios, and it's not just him, it's most banks in town, as long as you're meeting those ratios, banks are conservative, and they have standards. But as long as you're meeting those ratios, they'll just, I mean, you can take as many of those things and put them on that umbrella loan, or whatever you want to call it, as you want to. And that's the way it worked. I had a credit line, and then I had kind of an unlimited amount over here for rentals. And I had just one big loan, and every time I slid one off of the credit line over into this one big loan, it's got one loan number, dash one, same loan number, dash two, same loan number, dash three. And they would all have individual payoffs, so I wanted to sell one. But it was just one big umbrella loan at that bank that I could just keep sliding properties off of when I rented them. So I also used that credit line to flip houses. So usually and this is getting into more stuff than I need to talk about, I'm happy to talk about it, but I would usually flip a couple and then buy rental. Flip a couple, buy rental. Flip a couple, buy rental. And I always said I was kind of flipping to feed my rental habit, is what I used to say. Like I'd flip houses, feed rental. Flip houses, buy rental. I'm not really buying as many rentals now because I've kind of gotten, my goal when I started was I wanted to have 50 houses by the time I was 35, and then I wanted to have those 50 paid off by the time I was 50. So I wanted to have by the time I was 35, have 50 houses, refinance them all, pull some cash out, put 15-year loans on them all, and then by the time I'm 50, have all those 15-year loans paid off. And then I'll have 50 houses paid off by the time I'm 50. So I'm not really, I've got those houses, I'm not really buying more, I'm just trying to pay the ones down that I have. So obviously when a deal comes along, I can't pass up and buy it. But I'm doing a lot more flipping now. I'm in some Airbnbs, like you're talking about. What else? Questions that answer you?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
So you mentioned the acorns that you stashed away in the next. Are there any specific steps you're taking to kind of protect yourself in the next?
So what I realized back then was I was very one-dimensional. I bought houses and I had some rentals, but that was all I did. And so I've tried to diversify a little bit. So still a lot of what I do is real estate involved, but I've made it so that I'm not just so one-dimensional within real estate. I've got other streams of income. So I have the brokerage side of things. I'm an agent. I sell houses. I have a team that sells houses. And I've got rental houses. I've got some Airbnbs. I'm still flipping houses. I've developed more passive income, and I have more houses paid off. Back then I didn't have anything paid off. I was extremely leveraged, and I didn't really have any money in the bank because every penny I got, I was going to buy another house with it. So I realize now that you can't just take every penny you have and go buy houses with them, because if you can't sell any of those houses, you don't get your pennies back. And same thing, if you can get to the point you have some houses paid off, then even if you're taking a bath on them, you can still sell those in the market crash and get some cash together if you have to. And so I've just got that where I can be more in control of how that's going to happen rather than it happening to me, which really that's what it did before. It just happened to me. And this way I'm going to try to make it happen how I want to have it if something were to happen. So, yep.
As far as protection, like you have to pick the property to create an LLC for each one for protection.
So I feel like I'm a little bit old school in that. I don't. I have an LLC that I've traditionally bought and sold and flipped houses out of, and I've got an LLC that I hold my rental houses in, and I've got an LLC that has my Airbnb houses in. I've always been of the opinion that you can have as many LLCs as you want. If somebody's going to sue you, they're going to sue you, and they're going to pierce those LLCs somehow or another. And I'm going to try to do things the right way so I don't get sued. And I'm not going to pay an accountant to do an individual LLC, and pay an attorney to set them up, and pay an accountant to do taxes for 50 different LLCs every year, or however many I'm going to have to do. It's way easier for me to have one LLC, have all of that income come in through the LLC, all the expenses go out through that same LLC, and I'm not having to remember, like, oh gosh, who do I write this check from? And that, oh God, now I got to pay out of that account. Because really, if you don't have different accounts for every LLC, and you have it all in one account, they're going to pierce your LLC fail anyway, because you're still operating it as an individual. So I know that there's a lot of gurus that preach that, and that's just not how I've always done it. I think it's kind of, I don't know, I don't think it's the right way that I would do it, but, I mean, I can see the value that they talk about. But I think a lot of people that talk about that might be thinking they might have 5 houses or 6 houses. So it probably also depends on what your goal is for how many houses you want to have. And what I didn't talk about earlier is once you get to the point you figured out how much money you're going to make from each house, you figured out what your supplemental income is, the next question you got to ask yourself is how quickly you want to get there. So, because that matters too. You know, if you're trying to get to that $8,000 a month and you're doing it $250 at a time, then how many houses is that going to take, and how long are you willing to wait, or how long are you willing for it to take to have that day where you can walk in and tell your boss you quit? And so take that number and then obviously back into how many houses a year that means. And then again, look at your numbers and look at what you're doing. So if that tells you, hey, you got to buy 6 houses a year, that's 1 every 2 months. So if you look at it every 6 months and you only bought 1 house that 6 months, then you know, well, I got to go buy, you know, whatever it is. What did I say, 2 a month? So you got to go buy 5 that next 6 months. If you're not looking at that, then you'll be 3 years down the road and realize, oh shit, I only got 3 houses the last 3 years, and I was supposed to buy 18 of them. Now what am I going to do to catch up? So now it's going to be 12 years instead of 10 years, or whatever that number is that you come up with for yourself. So that was kind of a key to what I was talking about that I forgot to mention. So, other questions about anything? Nope. Good. Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks,
I
man.
appreciate you guys having me.